We are continuing in our series called Turning Points in Modern South African History since 1948. And before we get started, just to recap, in the first week we looked at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights after World War II, and we looked at what basic freedoms are afforded to people because they are simply humans. Last week we looked at the definition of racism, human evolution, and apartheid and the myth of race. In 1948, the National Party was voted into power and stayed in power for the next 46 years, up until 1994. The National Party believed in the separation of each race group and that whites should be in control. These policies were called apartheid, and we will be looking further at them today and next week. The National Party was not the first government in South Africa to discriminate against people who were not white. Before 1948, there were many segregation laws. The 1930 Native Land Act set aside areas called reserves where black people could own land. They could not own land in the rest of South Africa, and only 7% of South Africa's land was used for reserves, so they were very overcrowded. The government used the pass system to stop people moving from the reserves to the cities. All black men had to have a pass which stated where they lived and where they worked. Only whites had the right to vote, except in the Cape where some coloured men could vote. Black people were not allowed to do skilled work in the mines and factories. These jobs were reserved for white workers. Black workers did not have the right to strike or form trade unions, and they were therefore not protected. Only white soldiers were allowed to serve in the army. Black soldiers had to serve as unarmed workers. Black people had to live in reserves or in special areas called locations or townships on the outskirts of towns. This situation, however, changed during World War II because many black workers moved to the cities to fill the jobs of the white soldiers who had gone off to fight in the war. They did the skilled work that only the whites had been allowed to do before the war, so segregation started to break down. However, there were not enough houses for all of the people moving to the cities, so they had to build their own shacks and formed large informal settlements on open land. People became more aware of political issues during the war. The Allies were fighting for freedom and democracy. Black South Africans wanted this in South Africa as well, and they began to demand better pay and working conditions. After the war, many white people were worried about the breakdown of segregation and the growth of informal settlements. They were also worried by the increasing demands for political rights for all. They thought that black trade unions were getting too powerful. And because of these fears, many whites were willing to support the National Party. It promised to solve all of these problems with a policy called apartheid. The National Party won the 1948 election, and apartheid ensued.